Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a concept that's become, well, incredibly relevant in our complex modern world. Skin in the game.
Right. It's a phrase you hear thrown around a lot.
Exactly. But what does it truly mean? And maybe more importantly, why is understanding it so absolutely crucial to making sense of, well, everything, from ancient justice systems to today's financial markets, even our own daily choices?
It really cuts across so many domains.
Our source material for this deep dive is a really captivating exploration drawn directly from the work of Nassim Taleb, particularly his book Anti-Fragile, which deeply embeds this idea.
A foundational text for this concept, really.
Yeah. And our mission today is to dissect how personal risk and accountability aren't just, abstract notions. They're powerful forces.
Absolutely. They shape heroism, define ethical behavior, and fundamentally determine the robustness or maybe the fragility of society itself.
We're going to unpack this, not just to understand the phrase, but hopefully to arm you, the listener, with a fundamental lens to view the world.
And what's truly fascinating about skin in the game, I think, is its universality. Like you said, this isn't just about finance or business deals.
No, not at all.
It's a foundational principle, a lens you can use to examine everything from, say, the ancient codes of Hammurabi.
Which we'll get into.
Right. To the responsibilities of modern professionals, military strategy, even the very idea of personal dignity.
It's that broad.
It is. So our goal today is to extract the most potent insights, help you grasp this critical principle, and maybe even see your own world and the information you consume with fresh eyes.
Yeah, filtering the signal from the noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, navigating a world just overflowing with complex, often contradictory information?
Well, we're about to find out.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully, we can equip you to distinguish genuine insight from, well, mere noise.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this central unifying idea, the bedrock, really, of Taleb's argument. This notion that skin in the game isn't just about taking risks.
No, it's more nuanced than that.
It's about how it directly impacts anti-fragility, that ability to gain from disorder, and how it creates opportunities or optionality, often at the expense of others, which ultimately makes talk less cheap.
Right. Words have consequences, or at least they should have consequences tied to risk.
At the heart of this argument is what our source calls the malignant transfer of fragility and anti-fragility.
That's a key phrase, malignant transfer.
Yeah, from one party to the other,
Yeah.
with one side getting the benefits, the upside.
And the other one getting the harm, the downside, the fragility.
Imagine that. One side gains resilience, maybe profit, while the other bears the cost, the risk of collapse.
And this transfer, the source highlights, is facilitated by a growing wedge between the ethical and the legal.
Ah, okay. So just because something's legal doesn't mean it's ethical, especially in this context.
Precisely. The lines are blurring, and that allows these transfers to happen almost unnoticed sometimes, hidden in plain sight within the system.
So this malignant transfer, it's fundamentally framed as an agency problem, right? A concept from economics, but applied much more broadly here.
Exactly. It's an inherent asymmetry. That's another crucial word, asymmetry.
Where one person's upside, their potential gain, their benefit, comes directly from another person's potential downside, their loss, their risk.
And what's really insidious about modernity, the argument goes, is how often this downside is hidden, obscured.
How so?
By layers of complex systems, intricate financial instruments, labyrinthine legal structures. It's hard to see the direct link between the action and the consequence for the person taking the risk.
Okay, so the core critique here is a powerful one. Power is increasingly flowing to those who can extract what Taleb calls free options.
Free options, meaning?
Advantages, opportunities that come without bearing the corresponding risks.
Okay. All upside, no downside.
Exactly. Think about it. They get to
Alright.
play with other people's money, maybe other people's safety, even other people's futures.
With little to no personal liability if things go sideways.
Right. It's like a casino where some players are betting with house money. They keep the winnings, but the house covers the losses.
Which is a pretty sweet deal if you can get it, but maybe not so great for the system as a whole.
Not at all. And when you contrast this with how old societies operated,
Yeah.
the ones that actually survived, the ones that lasted.
You see a completely different ethos, a
Yes.
different way of thinking about risk and responsibility.
Yeah. In those societies, there was often a direct, immediate, visible consequence for actions that caused harm. Accountability was just baked into the system.
It had to be, for survival maybe.
Perhaps. So Think about how this agency problem manifests today in everyday situations.
Give me an example.
Okay, like a corporate executive greenlighting a super risky venture. If it works, massive bonus, praise, maybe a promotion.
Right, hero status.
But if it fails, the company goes bankrupt, workers lose their jobs, shareholders lose their shirts,
But the executive,
might walk away with a golden parachute,
well,
largely insulated from the personal ruin borne by others.
so their skin wasn't really in the game in the same way as the employees or shareholders.
Not even close. Or think about a government official approving a huge public works project.
Okay.
If it goes way over budget or just fails to deliver what was promised, it's the taxpayers who foot the bill, who suffer the consequences.
And the official.
Their career might be fine. Maybe they move on to another big role. Modern systems with limited liability, bureaucracy, legal shields, they're incredibly effective at obscuring these direct consequences.
Diffusing responsibility, making it hard to pin down who's actually accountable when things go wrong.
Exactly. That diffusion is key to the problem.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, this isn't just about finance or government projects, is it?
No, the argument is it points to something deeper, a fundamental ethical breakdown.
Where accountability is just severed from consequence, completely detached.
Yeah. Which raises a really critical question. How can societies function effectively? How can they stay robust, fair?
When a significant chunk of its decision makers are totally insulated from the fallout of their choices.
Right. Because that insulation, precisely because it removes the personal cost, it creates a system that almost incentivizes recklessness, doesn't it?
It seems like it would have to. If you don't feel the pain of your mistakes, why be overly cautious?
Whereas traditional societies, with their often brutal but very direct feedback loops, they just couldn't sustain that kind of detached decision-making.
The system itself becomes fragile, or as Taleb would put it, it becomes anti-fragile for the insulated few.
Meaning they actually gain from the chaos.
Right. While it becomes increasingly brittle, susceptible to collapse for the many who bear the risks, that fragility gets transferred.
So anti-fragility for some, fragility for others, fueled by this lack of skin in the game.
That's the core asymmetry.
Okay, so the source then points to this really profound shift between old and modern societies. It talks about the disappearance of the sense of heroism.
Heroism, that's a loaded word. What does it mean in this context?
Well, it's defined very specifically here, potently, I'd say, as the exact inverse of agency problems.
The inverse. Okay.
So it describes someone who deliberately elects to bear the disadvantage for the sake of others.
So instead of transferring risk away from yourself, you actively take on risk for others.
Exactly. In older societies, the source argues, respect, admiration, even power. It consistently went to those who genuinely took downside risks, often extreme risks, for the benefit of their community or those they led.
It was about a shared fate, standing in front of your people, not behind them.
Yeah. The source gives some powerful examples, almost visceral.
Like what?
Think about the stories of a nanny dying to save a child from a car. That's the ultimate inverse agency problem, right? Absorbing the absolute worst disadvantage, death for another survival.
That's, profound.
Or consider the ancient Romans. The source notes they valued honorable death, mors honestissima,
Right, how you died mattered.
immensely. It wasn't just dying, but dying nobly for a cause, with dignity. And the word sacrifice itself.
Related to the sacred, right. Separate from the profane.
Exactly. Implying that genuine sacrifice isn't just a loss. It elevates. It's revered.
So the very definition of respect in traditional societies was tied to this willingness to face the downside.
Directly tied. How worthy a person was, as the downside he is willing to face for the sake of others. That was the measure.
And this applied broadly.
To an astonishingly diverse range of figures. Knights, generals leading the charge.
Putting their lives directly on the line.
Mafia dons, whose authority came with the constant personal risk of getting whacked.
Interesting example. But it fits the logic.
Even saints, devoting their lives to serving the weak, often enduring immense hardship and persecution.
Okay, so across the board, these figures took greater, often existential risks because of their position or their devotion.
They all possess skin in the game, in its most profound, undeniable sense. They weren't insulated.
Got it. That makes the concept of heroism much clearer in this context. It's about shouldering risk for others.
Okay, so the source then presents what it calls Taleb's triad, or sometimes Table 7. It's a framework.
A way to categorize people based on their skin in the game.
Exactly. helps understand roles and dynamics in society.
Mm-hmm.
It breaks down into three categories.
Okay, what are they?
First, those with no skin in the game. These are the people who primarily benefit from others' actions or risks.
But incur no harm or significant downside themselves. All upside, no downside. We talked about this.
Right. Second, those who neither benefit nor harm others. Kind of neutral parties, just going about their business without externalizing risk or extracting undue benefit.
Okay, the middle ground.
And finally, the third category, the sacrificial ones.
Ah, these are the heroes we were just discussing.
Essentially, yes. These are the individuals who truly take the harm, bear the significant downside for the sake of others. This group embodies skin in the game, or even in extreme cases, soul in the game.
Soul in the game. That implies total commitment, doesn't it? Existential.
It does. A complete, often life or death commitment.
So this triad, how does it help us analyze modern society?
Well, it becomes a pretty sharp critique of many contemporary salaried positions.
Oh, how so?
The source bluntly says 99% of people in salaried jobs are just being paid to show up. And by the structure of their employment, they're insulated from the direct outcomes or significant negative consequences of their work.
Okay, unpack that. Give me an example.
All right, think of a salaried editor at a publishing house.
Okay.
They get paid their fixed salary, whether the book they edit is a bestseller or a total flop.
Right. Their income is stable regardless of the book's outcome. Minimal personal financial risk.
Now contrast that with the writer of the book.
Ah, huge reputation risk if the book fails. Future earnings, advances, all potentially tied to sales.
Exactly. Their financial livelihood has direct skin in the game.
Okay, clear difference there. Another example.
A street vendor, selling goods on a corner.
Complete skin in the game, presumably.
Totally. Performance directly impacts livelihood every single day. If they don't sell, they don't eat. Immediate, visible, personal consequences.
Right. Versus
a pseudo-businessman operating within a limited liability corporation.
where personal assets are legally protected if the company fails?
Precisely. The company goes bankrupt. The individual often keeps their personal wealth. They've effectively externalized the risk onto creditors, employees, maybe taxpayers.
Got it. And entrepreneurship, where does that fit?
Taleb sees entrepreneurship as the equivalent of a fighter in these times.
A fighter, why?
Because entrepreneurs often put everything on the line. Personal savings, reputation, family security, bearing direct financial and reputation risk.
Their fate is directly tied to the venture's outcome.
Exactly. They embody skin in the game. They're the sacrificial ones in the modern economy, showing courage through direct exposure.
So this framework, this triad, it forces us to ask a pretty fundamental question, doesn't it?
Which is,
How do we truly assess value or genuine contribution in a system where rewards and risks are so dramatically and often invisibly unequal?
right, it shifts the focus.
Yeah, away from just output or appearances towards genuine exposure, personal consequence, accountability.
It provides a measure beyond just competence or charisma.
Without skin in the game, it's often just talk. And that talk, however smart it sounds, lacks real weight, real meaning.
It's the difference between the commentator in the booth and the player on the field.
Exactly. Who truly bears the consequences? Who's exposed? That's the question this forces us to ask.
Okay, moving on to courage. The source emphasizes its foundational role for society's robustness, even its anti-fragility.
Societies endure because someone, somewhere, was willing to take risks for the group.
Right. But it makes a crucial distinction. True courage versus pseudo-courage. What's the difference there?
Okay, interested to hear this.
True courage, the source says, isn't blind risk-taking or just recklessness.
No.
No, it's linked to prudence, which involves the courage to fight your own impulses.
Ah, so discipline, foresight, not just rushing in.
Exactly. It implies thoughtfulness. Whereas pseudo-courage often comes from risk blindness.
Risk blindness, just not seeing the danger.
Or underestimating the odds, the potential downsides. And the unsettling part, people with this pseudo-courage often become chicken and overreact in the face of real risks.
Why? Because they never truly understood the stakes in the first place.
Precisely. They underestimated them. So this challenges that simple Hollywood idea of bravery. Genuine courage needs foresight, discipline, understanding consequences, not just boldness.
That makes sense. It's a more grounded view of courage.
And heroism itself, it seems, has evolved through civilizations, from the physical to the philosophical.
How so? What's the progression?
Well, pre-classical Homeric times, primarily physical courage. Think of that Lacedaemonian king wanting the privilege of death in battle. martial prowess, dying gloriously.
Okay, warrior culture.
Then later classical times, like Augustus and the Roman Republic,
Yeah.
it evolves to include acts of renunciation, self-sacrifice for others, for the collective.
So putting the community's well-being first,
Right.
stability, the future.
Right. Not just fighting, but giving things up for the greater good. Altruism, almost.
And then,
Finally, the more modern, Socratic, Platonic form, the courage to stand up for an idea, even facing death, for the privilege of dying for truth and standing up for one's value,
the courage of conviction, standing for
which
principles.
became, the source argues, the highest form of honor. Think of Socrates choosing death over renouncing his principles, or others throughout history who faced severe personal risk for ideas.
So a shift from courage of the body to courage for the community to courage of the mind and its principles.
That seems to be the arc presented.
Okay. Interesting progression.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the source then critiques what it calls glorified heroism in the modern middle class.
Glorified heroism. What's the issue there?
Well, the argument is that happiness today is often narrowly defined as economic, otherwise unimaterialistic.
Okay. Money, stuff, status tied to wealth.
Right. And this leads to adopting what Taleb calls free middle-class values, which he says are enshrining the usual opiates of the defied class.
Opiates. That's strong language. What are these values?
Things like hard work for corporations, even, provocatively, a tobacco company, corporate captivity, obedience, blind reliance on stock market investments,
Okay.
tropical vacations as the ultimate escape, suburban life with the dog, the wine tasting. You get the picture.
Yeah, a certain kind of comfortable conformity. What's the problem with that, according to the source?
The problem is that success within this context is often random, driven by luck, market trends, just being in the right place.
But it gets attributed to heroism.
Exactly. A conscious act of heroism is non-random. It involves deliberate risk. So when someone gets rich from a lucky stock pick, they're lauded as a hero. It blurs the lines.
Between genuine courage and just good fortune.
Right. And furthermore, it critiques the ethical middle class for sometimes working for companies with questionable ethics.
Like the tobacco example.
And then using casuistry, clever but maybe flimsy reasoning, to rationalize it and still call themselves ethical.
So it's a critique of how we define success and how we justify our participation in systems that might lack real skin in the game or even cause harm.
That's a big part of it, celebrating luck and conformity over true courage and accountability.
That's quite a critique. It forces you to question what we value, and when we mislabel random outcomes as heroism,
We dilute the concept itself, and we incentivize the wrong things, chasing luck instead of making impactful sacrifices that involve real exposure.
yeah. What's maybe even more disturbing and uniquely modern is this idea of cowardice enhanced by technology.
Tell me more about that. It sounds chilling.
The source paints this stark picture. A nerd behind a computer in a DC suburb capable of blowing up an entire battalion in a remote place.
Wow.
And then after work, going to the gym for a workout, completely detached, emotionally, physically, morally, from the lethal consequences they just unleashed.
That is terrifying, the detachment.
And society, Taleb argues, gets fragilized by spineless politicians, draft dodgers afraid of polls, journalists building narratives who all want to look good in the short term.
And in doing so, they create huge deficits, compound these agency problems, because they're insulated.
Exactly. It highlights this insidious detachment of consequence, enabled by technology, by complex political systems, decisions with immense lethal outcomes made remotely, impersonally.
Without the decision maker feeling the impact.
It's not just a lack of heroism, it's almost an active cultivation of a system that rewards the opposite, the insulated talker over the exposed doer.
But the source is careful to add a disclaimer, right, about skin in the game. It's not automatically good.
Crucially, yes, it ensures the argument isn't oversimplified. It's not saying everyone with skin in the game is good or that every hero needs a dramatic death.
What does it say specifically?
That the triad, Table 7, does not imply that those with skin in the game are necessarily right, or that dying for your ideas automatically makes you good for everyone else.
Right, because many messianic utopians have caused quite a bit of harm, despite their commitment.
Exactly. And also, nor is a grandiose death necessary.
Yeah.
Many people, it argues, fight even in the patient grind of their daily lives without looking like heroes. They suffer society's ingratitude, while media-friendly pseudo-heroes get the attention.
So it acknowledges quiet, everyday heroism, bearing burdens without fanfare.
Precisely. It adds that vital nuance. It's not about advocating recklessness or glorifying all risk takers. It's about genuine commitment and exposure versus mere talk.
And it defines a half-man, not as someone without opinions.
But just someone who does not take risks for those opinions.
Right.
It's about backing your words with potential personal costs.
That's a clear distinction.
And what's really fascinating and counterintuitive, maybe, is the historical context of gladiators it brings up.
Oh yeah, that challenges a common misconception, doesn't it?
Hugely. Taleb cites historian Powell, showing it's largely a myth that gladiators were forced labor.
Really? So they weren't all slaves forced to fight?
Apparently not. Most were volunteers who wanted the chance to become heroes by risking their lives and winning.
Wow. Volunteers seeking heroism through extreme risk.
And even more powerfully, when failing, they sought to show how they were able to die honorably without cowering.
Dying with dignity, even in defeat, in front of everyone.
Yeah, it suggests this intrinsic human drive for dignity, earned through facing extreme risk. And spectators, it adds, did not care for non-volunteers, as these did not have their soul in the fight.
So the voluntary nature, the soul in the game, mattered immensely to the perceived honor.
It seems so. It's a powerful anecdote about the desire for dignity earned through consequence. It wasn't just servitude, it was a choice, albeit an extreme one, involving the ultimate skin in the game.
And on a deeply personal note, the author shares that story about his father.
Yes, the incident during the Lebanese War, refusing to comply with a militiaman's demand.
Getting shot for it, carrying the bullet for life.
And the lesson drawn, dignity is worth nothing unless you earn it, unless you are willing to pay a price for it.
That crystallizes the whole idea, doesn't it? This concept he calls megalon, or shim.
Right, a sense of grandeur, non-smallness, contrasting with humility sometimes valued elsewhere.
For Taleb, megalon means if you take risks and face your fate with dignity, there is nothing you can do that makes you small.
And the flip side, if you don't take risks, there is nothing you can do that makes you grand.
Wow, that's stark. And he even says insults from a half-man, someone risk-averse, are like barks by non-human animals.
Yeah, suggesting they can't diminish someone whose dignity is earned through courage and exposure. It's an internal fortitude.
That personal story really embodies the essence of skin in the game in its most profound form. Dignity, self-respect, earned through exposure.
Absolutely. It's about valuing integrity, courage, self-respect above comfort or safety. And that, for the source, is the bedrock of genuine character and respect. Some things are worth risking everything for.
Okay, so after all these examples, what does this mean for that unifying foundational asymmetry between ethics and fragility in a modern society?
The argument is forceful. We cannot separate fragility and ethics. They're intertwined.
And it's getting worse.
Yes. The effective transfers of fragility are becoming more acute as modernity is building up. It's intensifying.
Meaning many professions, especially influential ones, are becoming more anti-fragile at the expense of our fragility.
Exactly. They gain from disorder, uncertainty, the risks borne by the rest of society. They're insulated, protected, often profiting from the volatility that destabilizes everyone else.
The source gives specific examples of these professions.
Yeah, provocative ones. Tenured government employees, academic researchers, journalists, the medical establishment, big pharma, and many more.
Let's break that down. A tenured government employee makes policies affecting millions.
But their job security, their livelihood, is largely unaffected by the outcome, good or bad.
An academic researcher publishes influential theories.
Which might prove disastrously wrong when applied in the real world. But their career, tenure, funding rarely suffer the same direct consequences as, say, a startup founder whose business collapses based on flawed advice.
Journalists shaping public opinion, narratives.
Can incite panic, contribute to harmful policies, but face no direct personal liability beyond maybe a career setback, not the kind of ruin they might indirectly cause others.
And the medical establishment, big pharma.
While essential, often operate with layers of legal and financial insulation, putting the burden of risk and bad outcomes onto the patient or the public purse, not the decision makers at the top.
So these roles become anti-fragile because they benefit from volatility, errors, while society bears the fragility caused by their detached actions.
That's the core of the critique for those specific examples. The incentives are skewed because the risk is externalized.
Given this escalating problem, how do we start to solve it? The source looks way back to ancient remedies, Hammurabi's Code.
Right. 3,800 years old, establishing this brutal but profound symmetry of fragility, direct skin in the game.
Like the builder example. House collapses, kills the owner.
The builder is put to death. Owner's son dies, builder's son dies. Slave dies, builder provides an equivalent slave.
Horrifying by today's standards, but the purpose wasn't just punishment after the fact.
No, the argument is it was proactive. To save lives by providing upfront, intense incentive in case of harm to others during the fulfillment of one's profession.
Because the builder knows more, has more control, this forces accountability where it matters most.
Exactly, making it the best risk management, especially critical for those small probability extreme events, black swans whose risks are easy to hide or dismiss.
Hammurabi's code made the consequences terrifyingly clear and direct, forcing skin in the game.
And what's fascinating is how these ancient, seemingly barbaric rules actually showed a deep understanding of systems, incentives, risk, maybe better than some modern approaches that prioritize limited liability.
Yeah, diffuse accountability seems to be the modern way.
Which raises the question, what practical heuristics, what rules of thumb can we actually derive from this principle today? For our own lives, our decisions.
The source offers several compelling ones. Practical wisdom.
Okay, like what?
Fat Tony's first heuristic. Never get on a plane if the pilot is not on board.
Ha! Simple but profound. The pilot has ultimate skin in the game. Their interest aligns perfectly with yours.
Then there's Ralph Nader's rule. People voting for war need to have at least one descendant child exposed to combat.
Powerful. Forces decision makers to share the downside, consider the human cost directly, personally.
Ensures sober deliberation, perhaps.
And Roman engineers needed to spend some time under the bridge they built.
Standing under their own work. The English went further, required families to stand under it.
Wow, talk about direct, visceral accountability, ensuring quality from the outset.
For opinion makers today, a radical idea. Every opinion maker needs to have skin in the game in the event of harm caused by reliance on their information or opinion.
That's huge in our info-saturated world. What about forecasters, economic analysts?
Needs something to lose from it, given that others rely on those forecasts.
The core idea being
Predicting anything. Any prediction without skin in the game can be dangerous for others. It's like unmanned nuclear plants without engineers sleeping on the premises.
a recipe for disaster where consequences are externalized.
And Fat Tony's second heuristic complements this.
Which is?
We need to build redundancy, a margin of safety, avoiding optimization, mitigating asymmetries in our sensitivity to risk.
So building anti-fragility into the systems themselves, not just relying on individual accountability after the fact, resilience, shock absorption.
Exactly. So the heuristics aren't just about individual ethics. They're about designing robust, fair systems that align incentives and distribute consequences equitably, a blueprint for a more resilient society.
Makes sense. It's both individual and systemic.
But the source argues society today is doing the exact opposite of putting risk-takers on top. Instead, it's granting talkers a free option.
The talkers again, people who just talk, theorize, intellectualize, without doing.
Right, and the ethical issue here.
It's profoundly unethical, the source contends, to talk without doing, without exposure to harm, without having one's skin in the game.
Expressing opinions that can hurt others, yet you incur no liability. Externalizing your risk through words.
And this transferring fragility effect is much worse in modernity.
Yes, because of connectivity and newfound invisibility of causal chains. The intellectual today is vastly more powerful and dangerous than before.
How so? More reach, more influence.
Seems to be the idea. In older times, privilege came with obligations, personal risk, feudal lords, commanders-in-chief. They were on the battlefield.
Like Caesar, Alexander, Hannibal, Washington, Napoleon, even Churchill showing physical courage.
Exactly. But today, the collage world causes a separation of knowing and doing, leading to societal fragility.
The knowers, academics, consultants, journalists are separated from the doers, the risk-takers, soldiers, citizens bearing consequences.
Creating this dangerous imbalance. Advice, theories, narratives spread widely. But the originators face no personal cost for being wrong or causing harm.
The incentives are fundamentally misaligned. Talk is cheap, but its consequences can be huge for others.
And this leads to the stinging critique of the knowledge business.
Right, where talk by academics, consultants, journalists can be just talk, devoid of embodiment and stripped of true evidence.
It's not the victory of the most correct, but of the most charming, or the one who can produce the most academic-sounding material.
And the example given was Raymond Aron versus Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yeah, Aaron. Uninteresting, but had prophetic abilities.
Yeah.
Sartre, wrong about major issues, maybe cowardly, but looked radiant, impressive, and his books survived.
Illustrating the danger that presentation, charisma, intellectual fashion can trump truth and accuracy, especially when there's no skin in the game for being wrong. Style over substance.
Which raises that critical question for us as listeners, consumers of information.
How do you discern genuine insight from mere idle babble, or worse, harmful misinformation, when the talkers suffer no consequences?
Yeah. What stands out to you about the example of journalist Thomas Friedman? The source is pretty unsparing.
Very direct, calls him a fragile journalist who helped cause the Iraq War with influential op-eds, but paid no price for the mistake.
Also promoted the Earth's flat idea of globalization without fully grasping the fragilities it creates.
Right, which the source calls epistemologically irresponsible. And the problem, he is still driving the bus. No penalty for opinion makers who harm society.
Taleb even says a writer with argument can harm more people than any serial criminal.
That's a powerful statement.
It really is, highlighting the danger of unpenalized influential opinion, harm that's diffused, indirect, hard to trace back.
And then there are the post-it dictors, the hindsight experts.
Ah, yes, those who exclaim things after the fact. How do they operate? Why are they dangerous?
They always look smarter than the predictors because of the retrospective distortion. Human memory narrative. They operate by self-deception and cherry-picking, recall some vague thought, convince themselves they predicted it.
Exactly. Convince themselves, then convince others. They cherry-pick instances which their opinions played out and discard mispredictions into the bowels of history.
Conveniently forgotten.
It's like a free option to them, Taleb says. But we pay for it. We, the public, pay for their misjudgments while they claim foresight.
Delving into cognitive biases, humans crave self-consistency, retaining past thoughts that align with the present.
So the past becomes fluid, marred with selection bias, and constantly revised memories. And the consequence for us.
It is the central property of suckers that they will never know they were the suckers. The post-dictator leverages our own biases against us.
Appearing clairvoyant by fitting narratives to reality after the fact, leaving us vulnerable.
And the source contrasts this fluidity of memory and narrative, this manipulation,
Right.
with actions.
Right. Actions are asymmetric and do not allow cherry picking.
Reality intervenes, removes uncertainty, vagueness, self-serving bias, provides undeniable evidence of success or failure, brutal feedback.
The source even advocates for predictors having visible scars on their body from prediction errors.
Provocative, yes. Arguing that direct personal consequence is better than externalizing errors onto society without accountability.
So to assess true insight, you should investigate people's decisions via their investments or personal exposure, not just their words.
Right. Many who claim to foresee collapses add financial companies in their portfolio. A direct contradiction. Actions must align with words.
Like Fat Tony insisting Nero look at the physical embodiment of spoils, like a bank account statement, making victory tangible.
Or Caesar parading Vercingetorix, making an intangible victory concrete, undeniable.
The message, words fly, but an intangible victory has no value. Without tangible consequence, words are cheap, easily manipulated.
That's the essence. Skin in the game bridges abstract ideas and concrete reality.
Which brings us finally to the Stiglitz syndrome. What is this? Why is it considered even more severe than the problem with Thomas Friedman?
Okay, the Stiglitz syndrome. It describes this profound moral hazard. Someone causing action while being completely unaccountable for his words.
And the example is Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate economist.
Yes, co-authored a report saying the risk from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac debt was effectively zero.
A report widely relied upon, creating false security.
Exactly. Fannie Mae then exploded, costing taxpayers hundreds of billions in the 2008 crisis, yet Stiglitz later claimed to have predicted the crisis.
Wow, retroactively fitting the narrative again.
But the core issue here, Taleb argues, is deeper. Stiglitz was not just a non-predictor, but also a part of the problem that caused the event.
Oof. Contributing to the cause, then claiming foresight.
And academics, the source contends, are not designed to remember their opinions because they don't have anything to risk from them, highlighting a harmful misunderstanding of small probabilities by the economic establishment.
It's cherry-picking of the nastiest variety, because the perpetrator is not aware of what he's doing.
Yes. The syndrome combines remarkable analytical skills, blindness to fragility, selective memory, and absence of skin in the game.
And academics can propose opposite things in different papers without penalty.
Right. This absence of penalty makes them anti-fragile at the expense of the society that accepts the rigor of their results, even if Stiglitz genuinely believes he predicted it.
The problem is the ability to cherry-pick from contradictory past statements and convince themselves of their lucidity without facing consequences for being wrong.
Precisely. No real-world cost for disastrously wrong advice that contributed to the problem.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, it's a dangerous form of iatrogenics, harm caused by the expert.
Exactly. Not just incompetence, but a systemic flaw where experts use their status, cause harm inadvertently due to detachment.
And then claim later they warned of it, possibly without even realizing they caused it, due to selective memory.
That's the devastating possibility raised. Which leads to the critical question for you, the listener. How do we protect ourselves from this? From advice without consequence?
What's the cure offered?
A potent one. Never ask anyone for their opinion, forecast, or recommendation. Just ask them what they have and don't have in their portfolio.
Forces alignment.
Yeah.
Puts their skin in the game immediately.
Echoes George Soros. I don't care if you were right or wrong. Right. How much did you make? Wrong. How much did you lose? That's what counts.
The ultimate metric. Cuts through the talk.
And it points to the rating agencies rating toxic waste as AAA, protected as press under free speech, insulating them from liability.
A proposal. Say whatever you want.
But one's portfolio needs to line up with it. Opinions need personal weight, commitment.
Finally, that psychologist Gerard's heuristic.
Powerful. Never ask the doctor what you should do. Ask him what he would do if you were in your place. You would be surprised with the difference.
That is the ultimate skin in the game for advice, isn't it? Forces the advisor to internalize the consequences, shifts from abstract counsel to personal commitment.
A profound shift in dynamic.
So we've gone on quite a deep dive today, uncovering the critical, often hidden role of skin in the game.
In shaping accountability, defining true heroism, maintaining the ethical fabric of society.
We've seen how ancient wisdom emphasized shared consequence, personal exposure.
While modernity has perhaps unwittingly created these dangerous detachments, allowing talkers to thrive without bearing consequences.
Benefiting from others' fragility.
And that crucial takeaway. The past is fluid, marred with selection bias and constantly revised memories. It is the central property of suckers that they will never know they were the suckers.
A chilling thought, which raises that final, provocative question for you, the listener.
In a world where post-dictors and talkers abound, benefiting while claiming foresight, how do you personally identify and protect yourself from being a sucker?
How do you shield yourself from those offering opinions without consequence?
How do you ensure the information, the advice, the narratives you rely on come from those with true skin in the game?
Whose words are backed not just by charm or credentials,
but by undeniable action, tangible personal consequence.
Think about that. What stands out to you from our conversation today? How will you apply this lens moving forward?
We encourage you to relentlessly seek out sources that do have skin in the game, whose words are backed by action, risk, consequence.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.